Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly onto the dark water of Lake Texcoco, the sky still holding onto the last stars as dawn slowly stretches awake. You're standing in a narrow wooden canoe, feet slightly unsure, toes hovering above cool water that smells faintly of wet earth and plants. The lake is calm, almost suspiciously calm, the kind of calm that makes you whisper even though nobody asked you to. Somewhere in the distance, a paddle dips, then lifts, leaving soft rings that spread and vanish. You are here to tend Chinampa Gardens at dawn, and if you're being honest, you probably wouldn't survive this long term. Mostly because waking up this early without coffee is already a bold life choice. As your eyes adjust, shapes begin to emerge from the darkness. Long, rectangular strips of land rise gently from the water, bordered by reeds and narrow canals. These are Chinampas, the agricultural heart of the Aztec world, though floating gardens is the nickname that stuck, even if they don't technically float. That misunderstanding has survived centuries, which is impressive because you would think someone might have corrected it by now. Chinampas are actually built up from the lake bed, layered carefully until they rise above the waterline, stable enough to walk on, farm, and occasionally trip over before sunrise. The air is cool, and you pull your shoulders in slightly, listening to frogs finishing their night shift while birds clear their throats for the morning. You notice how quiet everything feels without engines, without traffic, without a single notification sound. The only thing buzzing is a mosquito that seems personally offended by your presence. You swat lazily and immediately regret it, because balance in a canoe before dawn is a delicate agreement between you and gravity. As the sky lightens, you can finally see the scale of the lake. Lake Texcoco once covered a massive area in the Valley of Mexico, surrounding the island city of Tenochtitlan. This is a mainstream historical fact that still amazes people today. The Aztec capital sat on an island connected by causeways, with canals running through it like a very organized, very damp version of Venice. Historians still argue whether the canal system was primarily inspired by earlier Mesoamerican practices or perfected uniquely by the Mexica themselves, but either way, it worked extremely well, especially when it came to feeding hundreds of thousands of people without supermarkets. You dip your fingers into the water as the canoe glides forward, feeling the chill and the faint grit of lake sediment. The water carries nutrients, life, and occasionally smells that make you grateful for the breeze. A faint mist hangs low, curling around the Chinampas like the lake itself is still waking up and stretching. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs quietly, the sound polite and unintrusive, as if even illness knows to keep it down at this hour. You take in the first Chinampa up close. The edges are reinforced with woven reeds and wooden stakes. Mud and plant matter have been layered over time, building soil so rich it looks almost unreal, dark and soft and faintly steaming in the cool air. One quirky tidbit you quickly learn, usually delivered with a smirk by someone who's done this longer than you, is that this soil includes lake muck, decaying plants, and yes, human waste. Night soil, as it's politely called, is recycled back into the fields. Sustainable, efficient, and deeply unappealing if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. You decide not to think about it. The sun is still below the horizon, but the sky has shifted to pale gray, then faint pink. You hear paddles approaching, gentle splashes that feel rhythmic, almost meditative. Canoes move along the canals like sleepy commuters, everyone focused, quiet, and purposeful. No one is shouting. No one is rushing. It's the kind of productivity that feels calm rather than stressful, which is rare in any century. You step carefully onto the Chinampa, shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. The ground feels springy, alive. This land, built from water and patience, produces astonishing yields. Another mainstream fact gently floats through your mind. Chinampas could be harvested multiple times a year, making them some of the most productive agricultural systems in the pre-industrial world. Corn, beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, and flowers all thrive here, fed by constant moisture and nutrient-rich soil. It's enough to make modern gardeners quietly weep. As you stand there, hands on your hips like you know what you're doing, you realize how much of this world runs on observation and memory rather than written manuals. Knowledge passes through demonstration, repetition, and gentle correction. Someone nearby clears their throat and subtly gestures that you're standing exactly where a canal edge will collapse later if you keep doing that. You shuffle 2 steps over, pretending this was always the plan. The lake smells change as the breeze shifts. Fresh plants, wet earth, something faintly fishy. Birds glide overhead, silhouettes crossing the brightening sky. You spot a heron standing perfectly still at the canal's edge, clearly taking this job more seriously than you are. The calm is broken briefly by your stomach making a noise loud enough to feel disrespectful. You apologize to no one in particular. Historians still argue whether chinampas developed primarily as a response to population pressure or as an intentional ecological strategy from the beginning. Standing here, watching water lap gently against the soil, it feels like both could be true. This place is engineered, yes, but it's also deeply attuned to the rhythms of the lake. It's not fighting nature so much as negotiating with it politely, which is probably why it lasted as long as it did. As the sun finally peaks over distant mountains, light spills across the water, turning the canals into ribbons of gold. The mist thins, birds get louder, and the day officially begins. You take a slow breath, feeling oddly grounded for someone standing on land that technically shouldn't exist. The work will come soon, planting, tending, paddling, but for now you're simply here, awake at dawn in a world built from mud, water, and quiet persistence. And honestly, if this were your alarm clock every morning, you might still complain, but you do it very softly. You settle back into the canoe as if this were already a familiar routine, even though your legs are still figuring out how balance works before breakfast. The paddle dips into the canal with a soft, hollow sound, and you push forward slowly, letting the canoe glide rather than forcing it. The water here is narrow, contained by the edges of chinampas on either side, and it feels like moving through a green hallway built from reeds, soil, and patience. Dawn has fully arrived now, not in a dramatic way, but gently, like it doesn't want to wake anyone too abruptly. As you paddle, you start to notice the layout. The canals run in straight lines, intersecting at thoughtful angles, creating a grid that would make any city planner nod approvingly. This isn't random. This is deliberate design, refined over generations. A mainstream historical fact floats calmly into your thoughts. Chinampa networks around Tenochtitlan formed an integrated agricultural system connected directly to the city by water routes, allowing food to travel efficiently from field to market. No carts stuck in traffic. No potholes. Just smooth, watery logistics. Your paddle strokes become rhythmic. Dip, pull, lift, each movement sending small ripples outward. The sound is soothing, almost hypnotic, like the lake is quietly applauding your efforts. You pass other canoes heading the opposite direction, each carrying farmers, baskets, or bundled tools. There's an unspoken etiquette here. A slight nod, a subtle shift to the side, no splashing unless absolutely necessary. You try to follow along, though your paddle occasionally slaps the water louder than intended. Somewhere behind you, someone clears their throat meaningfully. You paddle quieter after that. The chinampas themselves slide past in slow motion. Some are freshly planted, neat rows barely breaking the soil's surface. Others are thick with green growth, leaves overlapping, heavy with promise. The edges are reinforced with woven reeds and wooden stakes, keeping the water where it belongs. In some places, flowers grow along the borders, not just for beauty, but to stabilize the soil and attract helpful insects. It's agriculture that understands multitasking long before the term existed. You notice narrow footpaths crossing between chinampas, just wide enough for careful steps. These paths allow farmers to move quickly from one plot to another without constant canoe hopping, which you are grateful for, because climbing in and out of a canoe repeatedly before sunrise feels like a personal attack. A quirky tidbit drifts in as you watch someone hop across effortlessly. Experienced chinampa farmers could move between canoe and land with such ease that early Spanish observers reportedly struggled to keep up without embarrassing themselves. It's comforting to know that even conquistadors had clumsy mornings. The water itself feels alive. Tiny fish dart beneath the surface, vanishing when your paddle passes overhead. Insects skim across the canal, leaving delicate V-shaped trails behind them. Frogs sit along the edges, occasionally plopping into the water with a sound that makes you jump every single time, even though you absolutely should be used to it by now. You tell yourself you are calm and grounded. Your heart disagrees briefly, then settles. As you glide forward, you begin to understand how the canals do more than transport people and food. They regulate temperature, distribute nutrients, and help prevent soil exhaustion. The water level is carefully maintained, rising and falling with seasons and rainfall. Historians still argue whether water levels were actively controlled by complex gates everywhere or managed more informally through local knowledge and constant adjustment. Either way it works. The Chinampas don't dry out, don't flood catastrophically, and don't demand much beyond attention and respect. You pass a wider intersection where several canals meet. Canoes gather briefly, then peel off in different directions like lazy thoughts drifting away. Someone pauses to adjust a bundle of reeds, tying it tighter with practiced hands. Another person scoops water with a basket, letting it drain back into the canal, carrying bits of nutrient-rich silt onto the field. It's slow, repetitive work, the kind that feels meditative rather than exhausting. You could almost forget you're working at all, if not for your arms gently reminding you that paddling uses muscles you normally ignore. The light grows warmer as the sun climbs higher. The mist that lingered earlier has retreated, leaving clear reflections of Chinampas and sky in the canals. You catch your reflection briefly, sleepy-eyed, hair doing whatever it wants, and decide that the water is being generous. Birds move more confidently now, swooping low to snatch insects, calling back and forth across the fields. Somewhere in the distance, a conch shell sounds softly, marking time or signaling a task. It echoes faintly across the lake, then fades. Another mainstream fact quietly anchors itself. Chinampa agriculture supported one of the largest urban populations in the world at the time, allowing Tenochtitlan to thrive without stripping the surrounding environment bare. Standing, or rather floating, here it's easy to see why. The system recycles nutrients, uses space efficiently, and integrates seamlessly with the lake. It's sustainable in a way that feels almost modern, which makes you wonder why more people don't talk about it during awkward dinner conversations. You try steering the canoe through a particularly narrow canal, misjudge the width slightly, and bump gently into the reed-lined edge. The reeds rustle disapprovingly. You apologize again, this time to the plants. A nearby farmer gives you a look that is neither angry nor amused, just deeply patient. You straighten the canoe and continue, cheeks warm for reasons unrelated to the sun. As the morning continues to wake, the canals fill with quiet motion. Canoes pass, turn, pause. Water laps softly against soil. Everything moves at a pace that feels intentionally unhurried, as if rushing would somehow offend the lake itself. You breathe in deeply, matching your movements to the rhythm around you. Paddle, glide, listen. Historians still argue whether this canal network reached its peak complexity just before Spanish arrival or had already begun adapting to environmental changes. The debate feels distant and academic compared to the simple reality in front of you. This system works because people show up every morning and care for it. No grand speeches required. Just mud, water, and steady hands. You let the canoe drift for a moment, resting the paddle across your knees. The water carries you forward anyway, gentle and persistent. You feel a sense of quiet belonging, even as a visitor, even as someone who would absolutely complain about mosquitoes later. For now, though, you float on, surrounded by green corridors and soft sounds, easing deeper into the slow pulse of the Chinampa world. You guide the canoe toward an open stretch of water where a new Chinampa is beginning to take shape. Or at least that's what you're told this patch of organized mess will eventually become. Right now, it looks like someone spilled a pile of reeds, branches, and mud and then decided it was a lifestyle choice. You step carefully onto a narrow platform, the wood creaking softly under your weight, and watch as the work begins in slow, deliberate motions. This is how land is made from water, one muddy layer at a time, and somehow you're expected to help without falling in. The process starts with marking boundaries. Long wooden stakes are driven into the lake bed in straight lines, outlining the future Chinampa. You grip one of the stakes, push it down, and immediately discover that the lake bed is both softer and more resistant than expected. It gives, then refuses, like it's negotiating terms. Someone nearby shows you how to twist slightly as you push, and suddenly the stake slides down, satisfying and firm. You nod as if you knew this all along. Between the stakes, bundles of reeds are woven horizontally, forming a kind of underwater fence. These reeds trap sediment and plant matter, slowly building up the interior space. It's oddly soothing work, repetitive, tactile, and quiet. The water ripples gently around your hands as you lower the reeds, cool and slick against your skin. A mainstream historical fact surfaces calmly. Chinampas were constructed using materials readily available in the lake environment, making them both economical and easy to expand over time. No hauling stone from distant mountains, just using what's already floating nearby. Next comes the mud. Thick, dark, nutrient-rich mud scooped from the canal bottom is lifted out in baskets and spread carefully over the reed framework. You help haul a basket, underestimate its weight, and nearly tip forward. There's a brief moment where everyone watches to see if you'll fall in. You do not, but you come close enough that it counts as a warning from the universe. Mud slops over the edge, splashing your feet. It's cold, squishy, and faintly smells like decay and life having a long conversation. Layer by layer, the Chinampa rises. Reeds, mud, plant debris repeat. It's not fast work, and that's intentional. Rushing would destabilize the structure. The goal is to create a firm, raised field that stays above water but remains close enough to benefit from constant moisture. You're told that over time, as plants grow and roots spread, the Chinampa becomes even more stable, almost self-reinforcing. Historians still argue whether early Chinampas were smaller experimental plots or immediately built at full scale, but either way, the method clearly evolved through careful observation rather than trial and error disasters. As you work, you notice willow branches being set aside. These will become ahujo trees, planted at the corners and edges of the Chinampa later to anchor everything in place. For now, they wait, their pale branches looking almost sleepy. You like the idea of trees as structural support, quietly holding things together while looking decorative. It feels relatable. A quirky tidbit floats into conversation as someone jokes that the lake basically does half the work for you. Sediment naturally settles, plants decay, nutrients accumulate. In some cases, abandoned Chinampas could partially rebuild themselves over time if left undisturbed. Nature, apparently, is very willing to cooperate if you don't micromanage it. You file that away as life advice. The sun climbs higher now, warming your back and drying the mud on your hands into a thin crust. You wipe your palms on your clothing, which immediately becomes a record of your poor decision-making. Around you, the lake hums with quiet activity. Canoes pass at a respectful distance, careful not to disrupt the construction. Birds circle overhead, occasionally landing on nearby stakes as if supervising. As the Chinampa takes shape, the water level around it becomes more noticeable. The canal edges are carefully maintained to keep water flowing evenly. Too high and the soil could wash away. Too low and the plants will suffer. This delicate balance is maintained not with gauges or pumps, but with constant attention. Historians still argue how centralized water management was across the Chinampa system, but standing here, it feels deeply local, dependent on eyes, hands, and daily presence. You're handed another basket of mud, and this time you lift with your legs, feeling proud of yourself for remembering that advice. The basket sloshes slightly, threatening rebellion, but you manage to deposit it where it belongs. The mud spreads, dark and smooth, a blank canvas for future crops. Someone pats the surface gently, flattening it with practiced motions. It's oddly tender, like tucking soil in before a nap. You pause to look out across the lake. In the distance, other Chinampas stretch in neat rows, green rectangles floating in a mirror of sky. Tenochtitlan lies beyond, still mostly out of sight, but you can feel its presence. Millions of meals depending on these quiet patches of land. Another mainstream fact anchors itself. At its height, Tenochtitlan may have housed over 200,000 people. all fed largely by systems like this. It's a number that feels abstract until you're standing ankle-deep in mud trying not to fall over. There's a brief break as everyone drinks water, resting tools against stakes. You dip your hands into the canal to rinse off some mud, watching it swirl away, returning to where it came from. The water is cool, steady, patient. You feel a strange sense of accomplishment, even though this chinampa won't be planted for a while yet. Building land is slow work, and that's the point. As you step back onto the platform, someone jokes that in a few weeks you won't even recognize this spot. Plants will cover it, roots will bind it, and it will feel as solid as any field on dry land. You nod, imagining that future. Historians still argue how quickly chinampas could be brought into full production, but everyone agrees it was faster than most other farming methods of the time. You take one last look at the muddy rectangle newly born from the lake before heading back to the canoe. Your feet squelch, your hands are dirty, and your balance remains questionable, but you've helped turn water into land. And honestly, that feels like a pretty solid way to start the day. You return to the chinampa you helped build earlier, now slightly firmer underfoot, and your attention shifts to the quiet guardians of this watery world, the ahujo trees. Their name feels soft in your mouth when you hear it spoken, almost like the rustle of leaves itself. These willows are not planted for beauty alone, though they do provide that in abundance. They are anchors, living stakes driven into the corners and edges of each chinampa, holding soil, reeds, and mud together with patient roots. You carry a bundle of slender willow cuttings, their pale bark cool and smooth against your palms. Each cutting looks unimpressive on its own, just a stick really, but you're told they root easily and grow quickly. You push one into the damp soil at the corner of the chinampa, twisting slightly the way you learned with the stakes earlier. It slides in with a satisfying softness, as if the earth has been waiting for it. You pat the soil down gently, feeling faintly responsible for this future tree. A mainstream historical fact drifts calmly into your thoughts. Ahujo trees were essential to chinampa agriculture, stabilizing the plots and preventing erosion while also providing shade and wood. Without them, the fields would slowly slump back into the lake. It's a reminder that nothing here exists in isolation. Every element supports something else, quietly and reliably, like a well-run team that doesn't need motivational speeches. As more trees are planted, the chinampa begins to feel defined, its edges marked not just by reeds but by the promise of roots spreading outward and downward. The willows will grow tall, their branches arching over the canals, dappling the water with shade. You imagine future mornings where paddlers glide beneath green tunnels, leaves brushing the surface, birds nesting above. It sounds idyllic, which means there's probably also bird droppings involved, but you choose not to dwell on that. Someone nearby mentions a quirky tidbit. Ahujo trees also helped regulate microclimates around the chinampas, offering protection from strong sun and wind. In a system where every degree of warmth and every breeze matters, trees become quiet climate managers. You glance up at the sky, already brightening, and feel grateful for the idea of shade later. You're already mentally planning to stand under it dramatically like a tired traveler in a painting. The planting continues in an unhurried rhythm. Dig, place, twist, pat. It's meditative work, the kind that lets your mind wander without drifting too far. You notice how the canal water laps gently against the chinampa's edges, occasionally splashing your ankles. The willows, once rooted, will break the force of these small waves, reducing erosion. Historians still argue whether early chinampa builders fully understood the hydrological mechanics at play or simply observed what worked and repeated it. Standing here, it feels like a mix of both, practical wisdom layered over generations of quiet trial and success. As the sun rises higher, the leaves of older willows nearby catch the light, shimmering softly. Birds flit between branches, calling to each other in quick, cheerful bursts. You spot a small nest tucked into the crook of a branch, carefully balanced above the water. The tree sways slightly in the breeze, steady and forgiving. You feel a strange kinship with it, rooted in place but surrounded by movement. You're handed another cutting, this one slightly thicker, and guided to plant it along the canal edge. The soil here is damp and pliable, easy to work with. You push the cutting in, feeling the resistance of packed mud give way. It stands upright, a future tree in waiting. You imagine coming back years later, seeing it tall and strong, holding the chinampa together while pretending it had nothing to do with it. Another mainstream fact quietly reinforces itself. Chinampas, reinforced by trees like these, could last for decades with proper care. Some remnants of chinampa systems still exist today, centuries later, a testament to their durability. That's a comforting thought, especially when compared to things you've built that didn't survive a single rainy season. There's a brief pause as everyone steps back to assess the work. The chinampa now has clear boundaries, its corners marked by slender willows reaching skyward. It feels complete in a way it didn't before, like a sentence with proper punctuation. Someone nods approvingly, and you take that as a personal victory, even though you know it's collective effort doing the heavy lifting. You wipe your hands on your clothing again, accepting that mud is now a permanent accessory. The air smells greener here, shaded by leaves and damp earth. The canal reflects the willows and long, wavering lines, roots hidden below the surface, already beginning their quiet work. You feel the pace of the morning slow, even as activity continues around you. Historians still argue how symbolic the ahujo tree was within Aztec agricultural life versus purely practical. Was it just a tool, or did it hold deeper meaning as a stabilizer of land and life? Standing here, hands still smelling faintly of willow sap, it feels like the answer might be both. Utility and symbolism often grow from the same root. You step back into the canoe, careful this time, and let it drift along the canal under the shade of mature willows. Leaves brush the water, creating soft ripples. The world feels held together by living things doing their jobs quietly without applause. You rest the paddle across your knees, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant splash of water, feeling anchored even as you float. You step out of the canoe again, this time onto a chinampa already humming with quiet activity, and your attention shifts from land and water to the people themselves. Morning work here has its own dress code, and you quickly realize your modern instincts have not prepared you for it. Clothing is simple, practical, and perfectly suited for damp soil and long hours outdoors. You adjust what you're wearing, trying to blend in, though you suspect your posture alone gives you away. You're handed a lightweight cotton garment, soft but sturdy, woven from maguey fibers and cotton. It's loose, breathable, and dries quickly when splashed. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your thoughts. Aztec clothing was designed around climate and labor, with farmers wearing minimal, functional garments that allowed for easy movement and heat regulation. No unnecessary layers. No dramatic accessories. Just clothing that understood the assignment. You tie the garment as instructed, fumbling slightly with the knot. Someone nearby fixes it with a quick, practiced motion, tightening it just enough. You thank them, silently promising yourself you'll never complain about complicated modern fashion again. Your feet are bare now, toes sinking into cool soil, which feels surprisingly grounding. You notice how easily everyone moves, stepping from damp earth to canoe to footpath without hesitation. Your own movements remain cautious, but at least you're upright. Tools are laid out nearby, simple in design but clearly well loved. Wooden digging sticks, stone blades, woven baskets, and small hoes rest against a reed fence. You pick up a digging stick, its surface smooth from years of use. It fits comfortably in your hands, balanced and familiar in a way that suggests generations of trial refined its shape. A quirky tidbit drifts through conversation. Some farming tools were passed down within families, repaired repeatedly rather than replaced, accumulating stories along with wear marks. You test the digging stick in the soil, pushing gently. It breaks the surface easily, sliding into the rich mud with minimal effort. The soil yields without complaint, dark and moist, clinging to the wood. You lift the stick, shake it slightly, and feel oddly satisfied. There's something calming about tools that do exactly one thing and do it well. As work continues, you observe how everyone carries themselves. Movements are economical, deliberate, and unhurried. No one rushes, yet everything gets done. Historians still argue whether this pace was culturally ingrained or simply the most efficient way to work in such an environment. Either way, it's clear that frantic energy has no place here. The Chinampa rewards attention, not speed. You're shown how to carry a woven basket balanced against your hip, supported by a strap across your forehead. It looks uncomfortable. You try it anyway. The weight distributes more evenly than expected, though you still feel like you're wearing a very opinionated accessory. Someone chuckles softly at your expression. You pretend this was your plan all along. Another mainstream fact quietly anchors the moment. Aztec farmers relied almost entirely on human labor, without draft animals like horses or oxen. Everything, planting, harvesting, transporting, was done by hand and canoe. Standing here, basket pressing gently against your forehead, you gain a new appreciation for just how strong and skilled these farmers were. Your neck muscles send you a polite complaint. You ignore it. The sun climbs higher, warming your shoulders. The loose fabric you're wearing moves with the breeze, keeping you cool. You notice how little sweat builds up compared to what you expected. The design works. Someone nearby adjusts their garment, tying it tighter before bending to work. There's a quiet dignity in these small, practical gestures, a confidence that comes from knowing your tools, your clothing, and your environment intimately. You pause to drink water from a gourd, cool and refreshing. The water tastes faintly of plants, not unpleasant, just earthy. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, smearing a bit of mud across your cheek. You don't realize it until later, but for now you look exactly like someone who belongs here, or at least someone who's trying very hard. Historians still argue how standardized farming tools were across different regions of the Aztec Empire. Some evidence suggests local variations adapted to specific soil and water conditions, while other tools appear remarkably consistent. Standing here, digging stick in hand, it feels like a blend of both, shared knowledge with room for local flair. As you set the tool down and stretch your fingers, you notice calluses on the hands around you, thickened skin that speaks of years of repetition. No one comments on them. They're simply part of the body, like fingernails or knuckles. You glance at your own hands, still soft, and feel a quiet respect for the work ahead. The Chinampa hums with low conversation, the scrape of wood in soil, the gentle splash of water. Clothing flutters, baskets shift, tools move rhythmically. You take a slow breath, feeling yourself settle into the cadence of the morning. The work hasn't truly begun yet, but you're dressed for it now, equipped and ready, at least in theory. You step forward, digging stick in hand, barefoot on living soil, feeling oddly calm for someone about to spend the day farming on land built from water. The lake glints nearby, willows rustle softly overhead, and for the first time, you feel like you might just manage to keep up. Quietly, steadily, one simple tool at a time. You kneel at the edge of the Chinampa, digging stick resting lightly in your hands, and wait for the subtle cue that it's time to begin planting. No whistle blows. No one announces anything. Just happens. People move, and you move with them, falling into a rhythm that feels older than words. This is maize planting, and it's done with care, repetition, and a quiet sense of respect that makes you instinctively lower your voice. You press the digging stick into the soil, twisting gently to open a small hole. The earth parts easily, rich and cooperative, as if it's been expecting this exact motion. You drop in a few maize kernels, smooth, pale, and surprisingly small considering what they'll become, then cover them with soil using the side of your foot. Press. Step back. Repeat. It's simple but not casual. Every movement feels intentional, almost ceremonial. A mainstream historical fact settles calmly into your awareness. Maize, or corn, was the staple crop of the Aztec world, forming the basis of daily calories for most people. It wasn't just food, it was identity, economy, and cosmology all wrapped in neat green leaves. Standing here, planting kernels one by one, you understand why. This isn't mass production. It's a conversation with the soil. You notice the spacing immediately. No one crowds the seeds. Each hole is measured by experience rather than rulers, roughly an arm's length apart. This spacing allows maize to grow tall and strong, its roots supported by neighboring plants but not competing too aggressively. Beans will later climb the maize stalks, and squash will spread low across the ground, shading the soil. The Three Sisters system, though not always called that here, works beautifully. You feel a small thrill at participating in something so elegantly planned. A quirky tidbit floats through the quiet chatter. Some farmers hum softly as they plant, keeping time with their movements. It's not a song you recognize, more like a gentle murmur, barely audible over the sounds of water and birds. You catch yourself doing it too, a low, aimless hum that somehow helps you keep pace. No one comments, which you take as a win. The sun warms your back as you work, light filtering through willow leaves overhead. Your hands move steadily now, poke, drop, cover, your body learning the pattern. There's a meditative quality to it, a feeling of being fully present without effort. You stop thinking about time. You stop thinking about anything really except the next small hole in the soil. It's the kind of calm modern wellness apps desperately try to replicate. You glance around and notice that not everyone plants exactly the same way. Some drop 2 kernels, others 3 or 4. Some press the soil firmly, others more gently. Historians still argue whether there was a standardized planting method enforced across Chinampa systems or if individual farmers adjusted based on preference and experience. Watching the subtle variations around you, it feels like controlled flexibility, a shared framework with room for personal judgment. A breeze drifts across the Chinampa, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. Canoes glide past in nearby canals, their occupants pausing to watch or exchange quiet greetings. A bird lands on a willow branch overhead and looks down at you with what feels like mild concern. You reassure it silently that you're doing your best. As you continue planting, someone shows you how to use a small handful of dried plant matter to lightly cover the soil. It helps retain moisture and discourages birds from investigating too closely. You nod, applying the tip carefully, feeling very knowledgeable now despite having learned this approximately 30 seconds ago. Confidence grows quickly when the task is repetitive and no one is yelling. Another mainstream fact gently anchors itself. Chinampa farmers could harvest maize multiple times a year due to the fertile soil and consistent water supply. This productivity supported dense urban populations without exhausting the land. You glance at the rows you're planting and imagine them months from now, tall green stalks swaying in the breeze. It's oddly satisfying to picture a future you won't personally have to weed. You pause briefly to stretch your fingers, feeling the pleasant ache of work done steadily rather than aggressively. Your knees are damp, your hands smudged with soil, and your clothing bears new stains that feel earned. Someone nearby cracks a quiet joke about planting straight rows so the gods don't get confused. You smile, not entirely sure it's a joke. Historians still argue about the degree to which maize planting was ritualized versus purely practical. Some evidence suggests specific days were chosen based on the calendar and religious observances, while other planting likely happened whenever conditions were right. Standing here, hands deep in soil, it feels like the line between ritual and routine blurs easily. When your survival depends on crops, every practical action takes on a sacred edge. You resume planting, falling back into the rhythm. The Chinampa stretches ahead of you, a patchwork of potential meals. The water nearby reflects the sky, now fully awake and blue. Insects buzz lazily, keeping their distance for now. You feel grounded, literally and figuratively, connected to something steady and ancient. At one point, you drop a kernel and watch it roll slightly before settling into a small depression. You consider retrieving it, then decide it's found its own place. The soil will sort it out. You tell yourself this is wisdom, not laziness. As the morning deepens, the planted rows begin to feel complete. You step back, surveying your work alongside everyone else. No one applauds. No one critiques. The field simply exists now, seeds tucked into earth, waiting. You feel a quiet pride that doesn't need words. Historians still argue how much individual households versus communal groups manage planting schedules and field maintenance. From where you stand, it looks like both: shared labor, shared knowledge, individual responsibility. It's a balance that feels surprisingly modern, minus the spreadsheets. You wipe your hands on your already muddy clothing and take a slow breath. The chinampa rests, planted and peaceful. The work will continue later, watering, tending, harvesting, but for now this part is done. You glance at the lake, at the willows, at the neat rows of soil hiding future maize, and feel the rhythm of the place settle into you. And if this were your daily workout routine, you think you might actually stick with it, mostly because no one's counting reps. You crouch down and press your palm flat against the soil, feeling its cool, dense softness seep into your skin. This is the part no one rushes. Before more planting, before watering, before moving on, there's a moment where everyone seems to simply check the dirt. You lift a small handful, letting it crumble slowly between your fingers. It's dark, almost black, rich with life, and faintly warm despite the early hour. This is chinampa soil, and it's doing most of the heavy lifting. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly into place. Chinampa soil was among the most fertile agricultural soil systems in the world, replenished continuously by lake sediments, decaying plant matter, and organic waste. Unlike dryland farming, this soil didn't need long fallow periods. It regenerated itself quietly and constantly, like it had a subscription to infinite nutrients. You scoop another handful, noticing bits of plant fiber, tiny shells, and soft clumps that break apart easily. This isn't dirt you fight against. It's dirt that cooperates. Someone nearby shows you how to gently turn the top layer with a wooden tool, careful not to dig too deeply. The goal isn't to disturb everything, just to loosen the surface so air and water can move freely. You comply, moving slowly, enjoying the soft resistance. A quirky tidbit surfaces as someone mutters that chinampa soil is so productive it can feel like cheating. Crops grow faster, roots spread deeper, and yields stay high year after year. Early Spanish chroniclers reportedly struggled to believe how much food came from such small plots. You imagine their faces, squinting suspiciously at a perfectly normal vegetable like it's hiding something. As you work, the smell of the soil becomes more noticeable. It's earthy, damp, and oddly comforting, like rain on warm ground. You inhale slowly, feeling your shoulders drop a little. Modern people pay good money for grounding experiences like this, and here you are, doing it accidentally while covered in mud. You notice that the soil stays moist even as the sun climbs higher. Water from the canals seeps in gently from below, maintaining an ideal balance. Too dry is never a concern here. Too wet is managed by careful canal maintenance. Historians still argue whether chinampa farmers actively engineered soil moisture through deliberate layering techniques or if the lake environment naturally did most of the work. From where you're kneeling, it feels like a partnership, human intention guiding natural abundance. Someone hands you a small basket filled with decomposed plant matter. You sprinkle it lightly over the soil, feeling faintly like you're seasoning a very large, very serious dish. This organic matter feeds microorganisms, which in turn feed plants. The concept isn't explained in scientific terms here, but the practice is precise and intentional. You nod as if you fully understand microbial ecosystems, even though you mostly just know this part makes plants happy. Another mainstream fact floats gently through your mind. Chinampas allowed farmers to grow crops year-round, dramatically increasing food security. In a world without refrigeration, supermarkets, or emergency delivery apps, that kind of reliability is everything. You glance at the planted rows and feel a quiet reassurance, as if the soil itself has promised to take care of things. You shift your weight, knees protesting slightly, and stand up to stretch. Around you, others continue working, occasionally pausing to inspect the soil, adjusting where needed. There's no sense of panic if something looks off, just calm correction. You spot someone gently removing a small clump of compacted mud and breaking it apart by hand, returning it to the surface like it was never a problem in the first place. Historians still argue how much knowledge of soil fertility was formalized versus intuitive. There's little evidence of written manuals, but practices are remarkably consistent. Watching the careful hands around you, it's easy to believe this knowledge lived in muscle memory, passed down through demonstration rather than explanation. You think about how often you forget instructions the moment you read them and feel a bit humbled. A dragonfly hovers nearby, iridescent wings catching the light. It pauses midair, perfectly still, then darts away. You take this as a good sign, though you're not sure why. The lake hums softly, water moving, insects buzzing, distant paddles dipping and lifting. It's a soundtrack that doesn't demand attention but rewards it. You kneel again, smoothing a small patch of soil with the back of your hand. It feels almost velvety. You wonder how many meals this soil has already produced, how many families it's fed. The thought makes you gentler with it, movements slower, more deliberate. You realize that everyone here treats the soil with quiet respect. Not reverence exactly, but recognition. A light joke drifts your way about how the soil remembers everything, including who steps too hard. You glance down at your footprints and try to step more lightly after that. Whether the soil actually remembers is unclear, but the idea sticks. You move with more care, feeling oddly watched by the ground itself. Another quirky tidbit surfaces. Lake sediment dredged from canals wasn't just waste, it was prized fertilizer. Cleaning canals and feeding fields happened at the same time. Efficiency at its finest. You nod approvingly, impressed by how nothing here goes unused, not even the muck at the bottom of the lake. As the morning progresses, the soil work winds down. The chinampa looks settled, ready, almost content. You brush dirt from your hands, though it never fully leaves. That's fine. It feels earned. The sun is higher now, warmth spreading evenly, and the lake reflects a brighter sky. Historians still argue whether chinampa soil could maintain fertility indefinitely without outside inputs. Some believe long-term sustainability depended on constant canal maintenance and organic additions. Others argue the system was naturally self-renewing. Standing here with mud under your nails and calm in your chest, it feels like both answers can coexist. Nothing lasts forever without care, but this system came impressively close. You take one last look at the soil, dark and rich and quietly powerful. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't draw attention to itself. It just works. You straighten up, stretching your back, and feel a sense of trust settle in. The seeds are planted. The soil is ready. Whatever comes next, this foundation will hold. And for once, you're happy to leave things in the dirt's very capable hands. You pause at the edge of the chinampa, letting your gaze drift outward, and only now do you fully register how alive the lake's sounds have become. Earlier, everything was muted, half asleep. Now the water hums gently with movement. Birds call back and forth across the canals, frogs croak lazily from hidden pockets of reeds, and insects buzz with just enough confidence to be annoying without crossing the line. It's not loud. It's layered. A soft orchestra tuning itself without a conductor. You step closer to the canal and kneel, resting your elbows on your knees as you watch the water's surface. Ripples overlap and separate, reflecting willow branches, sky, and passing wings. A heron stands nearby, impossibly still, neck folded in a way that looks uncomfortable but clearly isn't. You half expect it to lecture you on patience. Instead, it stabs the water with sudden precision and lifts a small fish free, swallowing it whole. You blink, impressed and slightly startled, then decide not to clap. A mainstream historical fact settles in smoothly. Lake Texcoco and its surrounding wetlands supported an incredibly rich ecosystem that chinampa farmers relied on daily. Birds, fish, insects, and amphibians weren't just background noise. They were indicators of water health, soil quality, and seasonal change. You realize that long before weather apps and soil tests, farmers here read the lake itself like a living calendar. As you listen, you begin to notice patterns. Certain birds stay close to the water's edge, others circle higher. Frogs call more insistently from shaded areas. Dragonflies skim low across the canals, hovering briefly before darting away. Someone nearby mentions, almost casually, that a sudden silence from frogs can signal trouble. Changes in water quality, unexpected disturbances. You nod solemnly, filing this away as knowledge you will absolutely forget until it's too late. A quirky tidbit floats into the moment. Some chinampa farmers believe specific bird calls signaled good planting days, while others warned of storms or pests. Whether these beliefs were symbolic or rooted in careful observation is still debated. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were primarily spiritual frameworks or early forms of ecological monitoring. Standing here, listening to the layered calls, it feels like both could be true without conflict. The breeze picks up slightly, carrying the scent of wet plants and something faintly fishy. Willow leaves rustle overhead, brushing one another with a sound like quiet applause. You close your eyes briefly, letting the sounds wash over you. It's calming in a way that doesn't require effort. You don't have to focus. You just have to be here. A canoe glides past, its paddle dipping rhythmically. The sound is soft but distinct, a gentle splash followed by dripping water. The paddler hums under their breath, barely audible. The canoe's wake ripples outward, rocking water plants gently before settling again. You watch the movement spread and fade, thinking about how everything here responds, adjusts, then returns to equilibrium.
Another mainstream fact drifts in. Chinampa canals weren't just for transport. They helped regulate temperature, moisture, and nutrient flow. The water absorbs heat during the day and releases it at night, protecting crops from temperature extremes. You glance at the water, appreciating its quiet competence. It's doing a lot without asking for recognition, which feels very on brand for this place. You notice small fish gathering near the canal edge, drawn by bits of organic matter drifting down. Their movements are quick, coordinated, then suddenly gone. Insects land briefly on the water's surface before taking off again. Everything feels interconnected, each sound tied to a small action somewhere nearby. You start to understand why silence would feel wrong here. The noise means life is functioning as expected. Someone cracks a gentle joke about how the birds start earlier than everyone else and never complain about it. You think about your own mornings and decide the birds are simply better organized, or possibly just more judgmental. Either way, they seem very invested in this schedule. Historians still argue how much Chinampa farmers intentionally managed wildlife versus simply coexisting with it. There's evidence of fish being encouraged in canals and birds tolerated, even welcomed, for pest control. But there's also a sense that the system thrived because it didn't try to dominate every element. Watching a dragonfly pause midair, then vanish, you get the feeling that balance mattered more than control. The sun climbs higher and the sounds shift subtly. Frogs grow quieter. Birds become more conversational. Insects buzz with renewed enthusiasm. You stand slowly, stretching, feeling the warmth on your skin. The lake sparkles now, reflections sharper, colors brighter. It's still peaceful but awake. You step back onto the Chinampa, careful not to disturb the soil you worked earlier. The sounds follow you, the water lapping, leaves rustling, distant paddles dipping and lifting. It's a soundscape that moves with you, never overwhelming, always present. You take one last look at the heron, still standing in the same spot, patient and focused. It feels like a reminder to slow down, to wait, to listen. You nod at it respectfully. It does not nod back, which feels rude, but you let it go. As you return to work, the lake continues its quiet conversation around you. Every sound feels like part of a larger rhythm, steady and reassuring. You don't need to interpret it all. You just need to hear it. And in doing so, you feel yourself sink deeper into the calm pulse of the Chinampa world, guided as much by sound as by sight. You straighten slowly and follow the canal toward a busier stretch of Chinampas, where the quiet work of planting and tending begins to feel connected to something much larger. Canoes pass more frequently here, some loaded with baskets already full, others empty and expectant. The air carries a sense of purpose, not urgency, just steady intention. This is where the scale of it all becomes harder to ignore. These gardens don't just feed a household, they feed a city. You watch as baskets are lifted from Chinampa to canoe with practiced ease. Each one is filled with produce, greens still damp with lake water, maize ears wrapped in husks, squash stacked carefully so they don't bruise. The movements are efficient, almost graceful, honed by repetition. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into place.
Chinampa agriculture provided a substantial portion of the daily calories for Tenochtitlan, supporting one of the largest urban populations in the pre-Columbian world. This lake-fed system kept markets full and stomachs mostly content. You imagine the city beyond the canals, still out of sight but very present in everyone's mind. Tenochtitlan wakes with the sun, its streets filling, its markets buzzing. The produce you're watching now will be there soon, spread across mats, bartered, cooked, eaten. It's strange to think that something you helped plant, or at least didn't completely ruin, will end up in someone's breakfast. You feel a small, quiet pride, the kind that doesn't require acknowledgement. Someone nearby gestures toward the loaded canoes and explains, casually, that timing matters. Harvesting and transport are coordinated so food arrives fresh. Canoes move early before heat builds and crowds thicken. You nod, appreciating the logic. Modern supply chains could learn a thing or two from dawn deliveries by paddle. A quirky tidbit drifts into conversation. Some Chinampa farmers specialized in crops destined for specific parts of the city: temples, palaces, neighborhood markets. Certain produce was considered higher quality based on where it was grown, much like modern ideas of terroir. You glance down at the soil beneath your feet, suddenly wondering if this Chinampa has a reputation you should be living up to. As you walk along the narrow paths, you see how the Chinampas cluster together, forming neighborhoods of fields. Families work side by side, sharing water access, tools, and information. Children move between plots, carrying small baskets or messages, occasionally stopping to watch fish in the canals. It feels communal without being crowded, cooperative without feeling forced. Another mainstream fact anchors itself calmly. The Aztec state collected tribute in the form of food from surrounding regions, but Chinampas close to the city were crucial for daily, reliable supply. They were less vulnerable to drought than upland farms and could respond quickly to demand. You imagine the pressure that came with that reliability, the expectation that these fields would always produce. The soil doesn't seem to mind, but you feel it a little. Historians still argue how centralized food distribution was within Tenochtitlan. Some believe state authorities closely managed storage and allocation, while others argue local markets handled most distribution organically. Watching canoes peel off in different directions, it feels like both systems could coexist. Order and flexibility side by side, floating on water. You pause as a canoe passes close, its basket nearly brushing your knee. Inside, neat rows of vegetables are arranged with care, leaves tucked in, stems aligned. The farmer offers a small nod as they pass. You return it, feeling briefly like part of the flow. The canoe glides away, paddle dipping softly, carrying the quiet labor of the morning toward a hungry city. The sun climbs higher now, casting sharper shadows across the water. Heat begins to build, but the canals keep everything cooler than you'd expect. You're reminded again how the lake moderates temperature, protecting crops and workers alike. Without it, this would be a very different, much sweatier story. Someone makes a light joke about how the city eats better than the farmer some days. You laugh softly, though there's truth in it. Feeding others comes first. It's not said bitterly, just matter of fact, like gravity or sunrise. You think about how many people you've never met depend on this place, on these narrow strips of land quietly doing their job. You watch as the last of the morning's harvest is loaded up. Canoes turn toward the city routes, moving with purpose now. The Chinampas behind them look peaceful, almost empty, resting after giving up their produce. The work here isn't finished, but this phase is complete. Historians still argue whether Chinampa yields alone could sustain Tenochtitlan during times of crisis. Some suggest stored tribute played a larger role, others point to the sheer productivity of these gardens. Standing here, watching canoe after canoe depart, it feels like abundance is the norm rather than the exception, at least on a good day. You take a slow breath and let your gaze follow the departing canoes until they blend into the maze of waterways. The city awaits them, bustling and loud, but here among the gardens, the pace remains calm. You turn back toward the Chinampas, ready for whatever task comes next, grounded in the quiet knowledge that this small patch of soil is part of something vast. And for a moment, that feels more than enough. You follow the canal deeper into the network, where the water seems calmer, slower, almost thoughtful. Here, the focus shifts from planting and harvesting to something less obvious but just as important: guiding water itself. You watch as someone kneels at the canal's edge, using a woven basket to lift water and gently pour it over the soil. No pumps, no pipes, just timing, gravity, and a very good sense of when enough is enough. You try it yourself, dipping the basket into the canal. Water rushes in easily, heavier than you expect. You lift it, arms protesting slightly, and tip it over the chinampa's edge. The water spreads across the soil, darkening it, soaking in quickly. You feel oddly powerful for someone holding a basket full of lake. It's irrigation in its simplest form, and it works beautifully. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Chinampa irrigation relied on constant access to surrounding water rather than artificial channels or wells. The canals themselves acted as reservoirs, keeping soil evenly moist and reducing the need for complex infrastructure. You glance around, appreciating how the system avoids over-engineering. Sometimes the best solution really is just having water nearby. You notice small variations in technique. Some people pour water directly at the base of plants. Others let it seep in slowly from the edges. It depends on the crop, the soil condition, and the time of day. Historians still argue how standardized irrigation practices were across Chinampa regions, but watching the subtle differences, it feels like informed improvisation guided by shared experience. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Children often learned irrigation timing by watching shadows. When the sun reached certain angles, it was time to water or stop. No clocks required. You glance at your own shadow stretching across the soil and wonder if you could ever be that intuitive. Probably not before coffee. As you move along the canal, you see small openings where water flows gently between plots. These aren't accidents. They're carefully maintained gaps that allow water circulation without flooding. Someone clears debris from one with a stick, restoring the slow movement. The canal responds immediately, water slipping through with a quiet sigh. It feels cooperative, like the lake appreciates good maintenance. Another mainstream fact anchors itself. This constant circulation helped prevent stagnant water, reducing pests and disease. You nod, imagining how quickly things could go wrong if water stopped moving. Here everything stays fresh, balanced, alive. The lake isn't just a backdrop, it's an active participant. You pause to rest, sitting on the Chinampa's edge with your feet dangling above the canal. The water laps gently against the soil, cool and reassuring. Insects skim the surface, unbothered by your presence. You feel the heat building now, softened by the nearby water. It's a comfortable warmth, the kind that makes you slow down rather than seek shade immediately. Historians still argue whether Chinampa water levels were regulated centrally through large-scale hydraulic works or primarily managed locally. Some evidence points to dikes and causeways controlling lake salinity and flow, while daily adjustments happened plot by plot. Sitting here, watching someone quietly adjust a water opening with their hands, it feels like grand systems and small gestures working together. You stand again and carry the basket to another section, pouring water with care. You're careful not to overdo it. Too much water can wash away nutrients, disturb roots. Someone gives you an approving nod, which you take as proof you've mastered irrigation forever. This confidence will likely last until your next mistake. The canal reflects the sky, now bright and cloudless. Sunlight dances across the water, sending ripples of light onto the underside of leaves. You watch the patterns shift, mesmerized. It's easy to lose track of time here, guided by light and shadow rather than schedules. Another quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers listen to the sound of water soaking into soil to judge moisture levels. A soft, muffled sound meant dry earth drinking eagerly. A sharper splash meant enough. You tilt your head, trying to hear the difference. You decide everything sounds wet and call it a learning process. As irrigation winds down, the Chinampas glisten slightly, soil dark in content. The work slows naturally, no announcement needed. People stretch, rinse hands in the canal, exchange quiet words. The lake continues its gentle movement, water flowing where it's needed, resting where it's not. Historians still argue how resilient Chinampa irrigation was during extreme droughts or floods. Some suggest it buffered both remarkably well. Others point to periods of stress. Standing here, watching water move calmly through the system, you sense both vulnerability and strength. Nothing is invincible, but this comes close. You set the basket down and take a long breath, feeling the day settle into a steady rhythm. The Chinampas are watered. The lake hums softly around you. And for now, everything is exactly where it needs to be, water included. You drift toward a cluster of Chinampas where the work feels slightly different. Not slower, just shared in another way. Here you notice more conversation, quieter laughter, and a rhythm that blends planting, tending, and preparation all at once. This is where you begin to understand how women's labor threads through the Chinampa system, steady and essential, without ever needing to announce itself. You watch as women move easily between tasks, checking seedlings, gathering herbs, shaping small mounds of soil with quick, efficient motions. Some work alongside men in the fields, others tend to food preparation nearby, rinsing vegetables in the canal, laying them out to dry in the early sun. A mainstream historical fact settles gently. In Aztec society, women played crucial roles in agriculture, food processing, and household economy, contributing directly to food production rather than being confined away from it. You're handed a small basket and shown how to collect tender greens growing along the Chinampa's edge. You move carefully, selecting leaves that are young but sturdy. The work is quiet, precise. Someone nearby hums softly, the sound blending with water and birds. It feels collaborative rather than divided, tasks overlapping naturally rather than being strictly assigned. A quirky tidbit surfaces as someone mentions that women often specialized in seed selection, choosing kernels from the healthiest plants for future planting. This wasn't flashy work, but it shaped harvests for years to come. You glance at the maize seedlings you planted earlier and feel a sudden respect for the invisible decision-making that determines what grows and what doesn't. As you move along the Chinampa, you notice children close by, helping in small ways, carrying light baskets, watching younger siblings, listening more than speaking. They absorb knowledge through proximity, learning what to do by seeing it done. Historians still argue how formally agricultural knowledge was taught versus informally absorbed through daily life. Watching these quiet lessons unfold, it feels like learning by osmosis, knowledge sinking in the same way water seeps through soil. You pause near a small cooking area set up on a raised platform, where food from the fields is already being prepared. Maize is soaked, ground, shaped. The smell is warm and comforting, a contrast to the cool dampness of the fields. You're reminded that Chinampa work doesn't end at harvest. It flows directly into meals, into nourishment, into everyday life. Another mainstream fact anchors itself. Gender roles in Aztec society were complementary rather than strictly hierarchical, with both men and women responsible for different but equally valued forms of labor. While some roles were gender-specific, many overlapped, especially in agricultural communities. You watch a woman adjust a digging stick's handle, then return it to the soil without ceremony. The work speaks for itself. Historians still argue how rigid these roles truly were. Some evidence suggests flexibility based on need, season, and family structure. Standing here, seeing tasks shift seamlessly between hands, it feels less like a rulebook and more like a shared understanding. Whoever is closest does the thing that needs doing. You're invited to sit briefly while someone shows you how herbs are sorted and bundled for later use. The movements are quick, practiced, almost meditative. Leaves are tied, stems aligned, excess trimmed away. It's work that requires attention but not tension. You find your breathing slowing to match the pace. A light joke drifts your way about how everyone works until the food is ready, then suddenly becomes very available for eating. You smile, already anticipating that moment. Hunger, it seems, is the great equalizer across centuries. As the sun climbs higher, shadows shorten, and the Chinampa hums with gentle efficiency. Women move easily between field and platform, between soil and food, bridging spaces that might seem separate but clearly aren't. You begin to see how essential this integration is. Farming here isn't just about growing crops. It's about sustaining daily life, moment by moment. Another quirky tidbit surfaces. Some women were known for particular skills, exceptional seed knowledge, herbal expertise, or uncanny timing when it came to planting and harvest. Their reputations traveled quietly, through word of mouth rather than formal titles. You imagine someone being known simply as the one whose seeds always grow, and find that deeply respectable. Historians still argue how much agency women had in land management decisions versus working within established structures. Evidence points in multiple directions. Watching the calm authority with which tasks are handled here, it's hard to imagine this system functioning without their leadership woven into it. You stand again, basket empty now, hands smelling faintly of crushed leaves. The canal reflects the bright sky, and the work continues around you, steady and unremarkable in the best way. No speeches, no separations, just shared effort moving smoothly from soil to sustenance. As you step back toward the field, you feel the quiet strength of this place settle into you. Chinampas aren't sustained by any single group or role. They persist because everyone shows up day after day and does what needs to be done, together without fuss. You're led toward a quieter corner of the Chinampa, where the work takes on a slightly more aromatic quality. No one makes a big deal of it. There's no dramatic pause or warning. You simply notice that the baskets here look different, darker, heavier, and carrying a smell that encourages slow, thoughtful breathing through the mouth. This is fertilizer, Chinampa style, and it's very effective in ways you might prefer not to think about too deeply. You're handed a small basket and immediately understand why it's small. Inside is a mix of lake muck, decomposed plants, and something politely referred to as night soil. You nod solemnly, pretending this is exactly what you expected. A mainstream historical fact settles in with calm inevitability. Aztec farmers recycled organic waste, including human waste, back into Chinampa soil as fertilizer, closing the nutrient loop long before sustainability became a buzzword. You sprinkle the mixture lightly at the base of plants, careful not to overdo it. The soil accepts it without complaint, darkening slightly as moisture spreads. The smell lingers briefly, then fades into the general earthiness of the field. You tell yourself it's just soil being soil. This is technically true. A quirky tidbit drifts your way as someone mentions that canal dredging served two purposes: keeping waterways clear and providing fresh, nutrient-rich sediment for fields. Cleaning the canals and fertilizing crops happened simultaneously. You appreciate the efficiency. You also appreciate that someone else did the dredging part earlier. You notice that everyone applies fertilizer sparingly, with intention. Too much can damage plants. Too little wastes effort. It's a careful balance, guided by experience rather than measurements. Historians still argue how systematically fertilizer application was managed across Chinampa systems. Some believe there were established norms passed down through families. Others suggest it was adjusted constantly based on observation. From what you can tell, everyone here knows exactly when to stop. You move slowly along the row, sprinkling, stepping back, checking leaves. The work is methodical, almost soothing if you don't inhale too deeply. The soil seems grateful, absorbing nutrients quietly. You feel a strange sense of satisfaction, like you're participating in a secret that modern gardening forums would absolutely argue about. Another mainstream fact anchors itself gently. This recycling of waste contributed significantly to the long-term fertility of Chinampa soils, allowing continuous cultivation without exhausting the land. In a world without synthetic fertilizers, this approach kept yields high and fields productive year after year. You glance at the thriving plants and decide not to question the method any further. A light joke passes through the group about how the plants don't complain, even if the people do. You smile, carefully maintaining a neutral expression. You remind yourself that this is no different from modern composting, just more immediate. Very immediate. As you work, You notice how the fertilizer is placed away from direct contact with stems and leaves. It's tucked into soil where roots can reach it gradually. This prevents burning and keeps growth steady. Someone corrects your placement gently, nudging the mixture slightly farther from a plant. You nod, grateful for the guidance and the lack of commentary. Historians still argue whether certain crops received preferential fertilization. Some evidence suggests maize fields were prioritized, while other plants relied more heavily on natural soil richness. Watching the careful attention given to each row, it feels like a nuanced approach, more art than rule. You pause to rinse your hands in the canal, swirling fingers through cool water. The lake absorbs everything, carrying it away without drama. Fish dart nearby, unbothered. The system continues, balanced and quietly efficient. You dry your hands on your already questionable clothing and return to the row. Another quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Chinampa farmers believed overly rich fertilizer could make plants grow too fast, weakening them. Slow, steady growth was preferred. You consider this and think about your own tendency to rush things, then immediately regret the introspection. The sun climbs higher, warming the field and helping smells dissipate. The air feels lighter now, easier to breathe. The work continues without comment, fertilizer applied, soil smoothed, plants left to do their thing. No one lingers over the process. It's just another task, no more remarkable than watering or planting. Another mainstream fact drifts through your thoughts. Spanish observers were often both impressed and unsettled by Chinampa fertilization practices, praising productivity while quietly judging the methods. You imagine the internal conflict and feel oddly smug on behalf of the plants. Historians still argue how these practices changed after European contact, especially with shifting ideas about sanitation and land use. For now, though, in this moment, the system is intact, unbothered by outside opinions. You finish your row and step back, surveying the field. Everything looks calm, orderly, and quietly alive. The fertilizer has disappeared into the soil, leaving no trace except healthier plants to come. You take a deep breath, carefully, and feel a sense of completion. As you rinse your hands one final time, you glance at the canal, at the Chinampas stretching out under the sun. Nothing is wasted here. Everything returns, transformed, useful again. It's not glamorous, but it works. And as you step away, you decide this is one ancient practice you'll happily respect from a comfortable historical distance, preferably upwind. You move toward a Chinampa where the work pauses not because it's finished, but because the timing matters. Here people wait, not idly but attentively. Someone glances at the sky, another at the water, another at a bundle of knotted cords tucked into a pouch. This is where planting meets the calendar, and the calendar meets the gods, all without much fuss. You're shown a painted page from a codex, its symbols bright even in the sun. Days are marked not by numbers but by signs, animals, forces, movements. Each carries meaning. Some days favor planting. Others are better for harvesting, resting, or simply watching. A mainstream historical fact settles gently. The Aztecs used multiple calendars, including a 260-day ritual calendar that influenced agricultural timing and ceremonial life. Crops, like people, had auspicious days. You don't fully understand the system, and no one expects you to. Instead, you're told quietly that today is a good day for what's already been done. That's enough. The Chinampa doesn't argue. The soil seems content. You nod, relieved that the calendar approves of your earlier efforts. A quirky tidbit drifts into the conversation. Some farmers believed planting on the wrong day could make crops grow crooked, bitter, or stubborn. Whether this was symbolic or observational is unclear. Historians still argue whether calendar-based planting had measurable agricultural benefits or primarily served to synchronize labor and belief. Standing here, watching everyone move in calm agreement, it feels like shared timing alone is a powerful tool. You notice small offerings placed at the Chinampa's edge. Flowers, a bit of food, a sprinkle of water. Nothing dramatic. No speeches. Just acknowledgement. The gestures feel less like worship and more like courtesy, a polite nod to the forces that make this work possible. You find yourself lowering your voice instinctively, as if the morning itself is listening. The sun shifts, casting new shadows. Someone remarks that the light is just right now, that it's time to move on. The group responds immediately, tools lifted, baskets shifted. No debate. The calendar has spoken, apparently, and everyone agrees. You follow along, appreciating decisions that don't require meetings. Another mainstream fact anchors itself. Agricultural rituals were deeply woven into Aztec daily life, blending practical observation with spiritual meaning. Farming wasn't separate from belief, it was belief enacted through routine. You think about how comforting that might feel, to trust that your schedule aligns with something larger than yourself. Historians still argue how strictly these calendars were followed by everyday farmers versus priests and elites. Some suggest flexibility was common, especially when weather demanded it. Watching a quick discussion about shifting tasks due to a breeze picking up, you sense that practicality always had the final say. You glance once more at the codex page, its symbols quietly confident. You don't memorize them. You don't need to. You just feel the rhythm they represent. Days unfolding, tasks repeating, seasons turning. The chinampa rests briefly, then the work continues right on time. You move toward a patch of chinampa devoted to herbs and companion plants, a quieter zone where subtlety matters more than sheer labor. Leaves glisten with morning dew, droplets clinging like tiny jewels. You bend closer, inhaling faint scents of basil-like herbs, soft mint, and something earthier you can't name. The work here isn't strenuous, but it requires attention, a gentle hand, and patience. You're shown how to thin seedlings carefully, leaving enough room for each plant to grow strong and avoid competition. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into place. Aztec farmers practiced companion planting, interspersing herbs and flowers with main crops to repel pests, enhance growth, and even improve flavor. Each placement is intentional, a quiet understanding of ecological balance. As you pinch away smaller, weaker sprouts, a quirky tidbit floats to your attention. Some herbs were believed to ward off spirits or attract helpful insects. The line between practical and magical is blurry here, and no one seems to mind. You hum quietly as you work, pretending you're an expert on the spiritual chemistry of plants. You notice the microclimate created by these companion plantings. Taller crops shield delicate herbs from harsh sun, while water from nearby canals maintains humidity. Historians still argue how much of this was carefully observed practice versus tradition passed down through generations. You watch and understand that observation, memory, and routine all blend seamlessly here. Someone hands you a small bundle of flowers and instructs you to plant them among the crops. The blooms are bright, their colors contrasting with the deep greens of surrounding foliage. You press them gently into the soil, imagining pollinators arriving soon to inspect your work. A dragonfly pauses briefly overhead, wings catching the sunlight before darting off again. You whisper a silent thank you to the ecosystem. Another mainstream fact anchors itself calmly. Companion plants can increase yields indirectly by reducing pest damage and improving soil health. Even without modern science, the Aztecs recognized these subtle relationships. You admire the quiet wisdom in observing, adjusting, and planting accordingly. As you move along the row, you notice the gentle variety of leaf shapes, colors, and textures. Some herbs are fuzzy, others smooth. Some release fragrance when touched, others remain silent. A light joke drifts your way. This is like a tiny jungle, but without the mosquitoes, mostly. You chuckle softly, imagining jungle sounds with fewer complaints. Historians still argue how widespread intentional companion planting was across chinampa systems. Some evidence suggests it was common near urban centers, where labor was abundant and experimentation encouraged. Watching the patterns here, you sense that even small decisions ripple outward, affecting the entire plot. You pause to touch the soil around a newly planted herb. Moist, pliable, alive. You consider the balance of water, light, and nutrients. It feels like a gentle puzzle, one that rewards careful observation rather than brute effort. You adjust a few small plants, nudging them into better positions. Nothing dramatic. Everything subtly aligned. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Certain herbs were believed to improve the flavor of maize when planted nearby, though whether this is folklore or subtle chemical influence is still debated. You pretend to taste the air around the plants and nod sagely, as if you've discerned the difference. As the sun climbs higher, the dew evaporates, leaving leaves shining but dry. The microclimate here feels slightly warmer, calmer, a quiet pocket of productivity amid the larger network of chinampas. You step back and survey the herb beds. Everything looks orderly, healthy, alive. Historians still argue how much trial and error versus inherited tradition shape companion planting. Watching the practiced hands at work, it seems both play a role. Knowledge grows slowly, nurtured by observation, repetition, and occasional luck. You brush dirt from your hands and feel a surprising satisfaction. These small plants, tucked carefully among larger crops, will reward the ecosystem in ways you won't immediately see. And yet, that's the point. They work quietly, without fuss, just like the rest of this world you're slowly learning to inhabit. You wander toward a section of chinampa where flowers and medicinal plants cluster, a subtle patch woven in among the more robust maize and squash. The scent is distinct now, slightly sweet, slightly pungent, a soft perfume that makes you pause and inhale slowly. Dew lingers on petals, catching sunlight in tiny prisms. The area feels deliberate, almost ceremonial, even if no one declares it so. A small basket is placed in your hands, filled with tiny bulbs and seedlings. You kneel, gently pressing each into the soil, careful not to damage roots or leaves. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness. The Aztecs grew a variety of medicinal plants on chinampas, including herbs for treating fevers, digestive complaints, and minor wounds. These gardens served both nutritional and health purposes, blending practicality with holistic care. You notice that spacing and sunlight are carefully considered. Taller plants shield more delicate herbs from the heat, while shorter flowers sit in the open. Shadows shift slowly as the sun moves, affecting microclimates within each mini-garden. Historians still argue how much scientific observation versus traditional knowledge guided these arrangements, but the results speak for themselves. Plants thrive in harmony. A quirky tidbit drifts through your attention. Some flowers were thought to encourage pollination for neighboring crops or even influence flavor. You try not to chuckle, imagining a carrot tasting slightly sweeter because a marigold was nearby. Still, the logic makes sense in an intuitive, pre-modern kind of way. You pinch off wilted leaves gently, letting them fall into the soil to decompose. It's slow work, meditative, rewarding in its own subtle rhythm. A dragonfly schemes nearby water, wings sparkling. Its movement seems synced with your hand motions, though of course it isn't. It's just another layer of calm observation. You hum softly to match the cadence. Another mainstream fact drifts in. Chinampa systems allowed for continuous cultivation, with harvests and plantings happening year-round. This constant activity supported urban populations and provided medicinal resources without interrupting food production. You consider the logistics, impressed by the careful orchestration hidden behind seemingly simple rows of plants. Someone hands you a bundle of small flowers to transplant. You tuck each into the soil, straightening stems as best you can. A light joke drifts past. They'll probably judge your planting skills when the bees arrive. You grin quietly, imagining insects offering silent critique of your work. Historians still argue how formally medicinal plant cultivation was integrated with daily chinampa labor. Some suggest specialized gardeners handled this, while others believe every household contributed. Watching practiced hands move among the plants, it's clear that attention to detail was widespread, if subtle. The sun climbs higher, warm but not oppressive. Dew has mostly evaporated, leaving leaves and petals bright and glistening. You step back to survey your patch. Everything looks orderly, healthy, almost glowing in the gentle sunlight. The subtle colors of flowers and herbs complement the rich greens of surrounding crops, weaving a quiet visual tapestry. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Certain flowers were planted for ceremonial purposes and seasonal festivals, Yet they also had practical benefits like attracting beneficial insects or improving soil. One plant in particular releases a scent only noticed at certain times of day, early morning just like now. You inhale, imagining future pollinators taking advantage of this subtle timing. You brush your hands, feeling a faint earthy residue, and let your gaze wander over the entire Chinampa network. Paths, canals, plants, and water all flow together. It's functional and beautiful, practical and delicate. And somewhere in that balance, you find a sense of rhythm, a slow pulse that doesn't demand attention but rewards it in calm reassurance. Historians still argue the exact rituals and intentions behind medicinal plant cultivation, but standing here, hands in soil and sun on your back, it's easy to see why these gardens thrived. Care, attention, and small, consistent gestures of stewardship. You step away from the bed, hands scented faintly with herbs, feeling quietly accomplished. Nothing is dramatic. Nothing demands applause. And yet, the work has meaning, soft, layered, enduring. You continue along the canal, where Chinampas begin to vary in width and height, a subtle shift that hints at years of experimentation and adaptation. Some plots are slightly raised, others flush with the water. You kneel briefly to touch the soil at the edge of a narrow bed. It's soft, damp, and pliable under your fingers, a contrast to the firmer, sun-dried topsoil of wider plots. There's a quiet intelligence in the variations, tiny adjustments made over generations to optimize drainage, sun exposure, and root growth. A mainstream historical fact settles comfortably into your awareness. Chinampas were ingeniously engineered to maximize agricultural output on a limited area, often only a few meters wide but long and carefully spaced. This allowed urban populations to thrive without exhausting the surrounding lake ecosystem. You step back to appreciate the patterns, rows, canals, plots, organized yet organic, a balance of human design and natural flow. You notice small fish darting near the canal edges. They avoid your feet, weaving between submerged plant stems. Some are tiny, silver flashes, while others are darker, gliding smoothly beneath lily pads. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Fish were sometimes encouraged in canals to control pests, their presence reducing insect larvae and helping maintain soil health. It's a subtle, low-effort form of pest management that blends with the environment rather than fighting it. Historians still argue how systematically aquatic life was managed. Some suggest it was intentional and deliberate, while others argue the ecosystem naturally balanced itself. Watching the interplay of water, plants, and fish, it feels like a mixture of both. Careful observation enhanced natural tendencies. You kneel beside a plot where maize, beans, and squash grow intermingled, noticing the spacing once again. Each plant has room to thrive, yet together they form a supportive community. Stalks brace beams, leaves shade delicate soil, roots intertwine below. The Three Sisters method demonstrates an elegance that requires no explanation, just observation and repetition. You gently untangle a vine that strayed too far, marveling at the cooperative choreography of nature and human hands. Another mainstream fact drifts gently. This polyculture approach improved soil fertility, reduced erosion, and increased overall yield. Even without synthetic fertilizers, the Chinampa system maintained high productivity through thoughtful, integrated planting. You step back, impressed at how carefully interwoven everything is. A small breeze rustles the leaves overhead, carrying faint floral and earthy scents. The temperature remains comfortable, moderated by nearby canals. You inhale slowly, feeling tension in your shoulders melt away. The gentle rhythm of work and observation continues to settle you deeper into a relaxed state. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Aztec farmers reportedly used small bundles of plants or flowers at plot corners as symbolic markers, believed to protect the crops or ensure good growth. Whether symbolic or practical, the effect was a sense of organized care. You nod, planting your hands lightly in the soil as if contributing to this subtle order. You notice someone carefully adjusting a small canal gate, allowing just enough water to flow into a patch of newly planted maize. The technique is precise, Too much water and roots could drown, too little and growth slows. Historians still argue how standardized these small adjustments were across the Chinampa system. You watch and understand it's a delicate balance between protocol and intuition. The sun rises higher, casting a warm glow over the field. Shadows shorten, highlighting the textures of soil, leaves, and water. You feel present in a way you rarely experience, connected to the rhythm of the land, the canal, and the people tending it. This is patience embodied, the slow, deliberate cadence of life that doesn't rush or demand acknowledgement. You step back, brushing soil from your hands. The Chinampa looks orderly, productive, and alive, a testament to generations of careful observation and collaboration. You take a deep breath, listening to water lap, birds call, and leaves rustle, feeling a gentle satisfaction that no applause could replicate. You wander toward a corner of the Chinampa where the soil is darker, richer, and slightly softer, evidence of years of accumulated fertility. It smells pleasantly earthy, with faint hints of decayed vegetation and water-washed minerals. Kneeling down, you run your fingers through it, feeling the way it crumbles and holds together simultaneously. This is the heart of productivity, soil that has been nurtured, recycled, and tested over countless seasons. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind. Chinampas were remarkably sustainable because organic matter, including plant residues and lake sediments, was continually replenished. Unlike many modern farms that exhaust the land, these plots thrived year after year with minimal external input. You gently press the soil around a cluster of young maize, thinking about the silent work embedded in every handful. You notice subtle differences in moisture. Some areas are darker and cool, while others feel warmer and slightly dry. Someone nearby uses a thin stick to test water penetration, a simple tool yet highly effective. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Early observers reported that Aztec farmers could read soil moisture by touch and even sound, tapping and feeling for subtle resistance. You try it yourself, tapping lightly, and swear you hear the soil sigh approvingly. Historians still argue whether formalized measurement techniques existed or whether farmers relied entirely on intuition. From what you're seeing, it seems that centuries of observation function as their own highly effective method. You feel reassured by the combination of practical knowledge and subtle artistry at work. As you begin planting a small row of beans, you notice the spacing carefully maintained. Each seed has room to grow without crowding, yet the plants are close enough to support each other. Stems twist gently as they climb neighboring maize stalks. The precision is calming. No rushed lines, no chaos, just order established by hands that know exactly what they're doing. Another mainstream fact: intercropping maize with beans and squash, the three sisters, enhances soil fertility and plant health. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil, maize provides vertical support, and squash shades the ground to retain moisture. It's an elegant system, low effort and highly effective. You glance at your hands, thinking about how such simple principles can sustain an entire population. A soft breeze moves through the area, rustling leaves and carrying faint floral scents. Birds call intermittently, punctuating the gentle lap of water along canal edges. You pause for a moment, taking it all in. It's a soundscape that doesn't demand attention but rewards it with a subtle sense of grounding. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers marked plots with small bundles of twigs or stones to indicate different varieties of crops. These markers helped manage planting schedules, harvest times, and even ceremonial considerations. You trace a small line of twigs, marveling at their practicality disguised as simplicity. Historians still argue how much ceremonial influence dictated planting layouts versus purely practical concerns. Some evidence suggests both played a role, with symbolic gestures often doubling as functional markers. You nod quietly, noticing how the two intertwine seamlessly here. You continue planting, moving slowly and deliberately, occasionally brushing dirt off leaves or adjusting seedlings. The rhythm of hands in soil, seeds tucked carefully, and water lapping nearby creates a meditative cadence. Each movement feels intentional, reinforcing the sense of connection to the land and the larger ecosystem. As the morning grows brighter, the sun casts sharper shadows across the Chinampa. You take a moment to stand and look around. The soil, plants, water, and hands working together form a coherent, living system. You realize that this quiet harmony, cultivated over generations, is a kind of wisdom that doesn't need to be announced, just practiced. You straighten, brushing soil from your hands and knees, feeling quietly accomplished. The Chinampa looks alive, orderly, and productive. Your attention drifts to the distant city, knowing the work here feeds countless lives, though you'll never meet most of those people. It's enough to simply participate, to leave the soil slightly better than you found it. You follow a narrow path between two Chinampa plots, water lapping gently along the edges, carrying the soft scent of damp soil and growing plants. The movement of the canal mirrors your own slow steps, a gentle rhythm that feels almost like a heartbeat. You pause to watch ripples spread from a dropped leaf, and for a moment, time seems less rigid, more like a soft pulse flowing around you. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly. Canals weren't just for irrigation and transportation. They played a crucial role in nutrient cycling. Sediment dredged from the canals was rich in minerals, naturally fertilizing the Chinampas. You run a hand along the water's edge, imagining centuries of careful maintenance that keeps these canals functional, alive, and sustaining everything around them. You notice a small frog perched on a floating plant, observing your movements with apparent indifference. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Some Chinampa farmers believed frogs were a sign of healthy water and soil, their presence an informal indicator of ecosystem balance. You chuckle softly, thinking of how different your garden might feel with a small, silent advisor watching over it. Historians still argue how intentional wildlife management was versus natural coexistence. Were frogs deliberately encouraged, or were they simply tolerated? From what you see, it feels like a balance. Coexistence guided by subtle human adjustments rather than strict control. You kneel to examine a patch of soil near the canal, noticing the delicate interplay of moisture, sediment, and root structure. The soil is dark, spongy, and filled with tiny organisms that you can't see but can almost feel working tirelessly beneath the surface. Another mainstream fact: Chinampa soils support diverse microbial life that naturally enriches the soil, reducing the need for external fertilizers. You run your fingers through it, marveling at how much life exists below your touch. As you move along the canal, you see a small network of wooden stakes and woven mats, designed to guide seedlings and young plants. The organization is subtle yet effective. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Aztec farmers used small, symbolic markers, tiny bundles of reeds or tied knots, to indicate which seedlings belonged to which household or which planting schedule they followed. It's an elegant system of communication that blends practicality and ritual. Historians still argue how widespread such symbolic markers were across Chinampa networks. Some evidence suggests they were common in urban plots, while rural areas relied more on observation and memory. Standing here, you see both methods at play, a mix of visual cues, intuition, and communal knowledge. The sun rises higher, casting dappled light through the leaves of surrounding plants. Insects hum softly, barely noticeable, and the water glimmers, reflecting both sky and vegetation. You notice a faint breeze carrying the scent of distant flowers and freshly turned soil. The combination of warmth, moisture, and gentle motion is hypnotically calming. You pause to adjust the roots of a small herb, tucking them carefully into the soil. There's a meditative quality to the work, deliberate, tactile, and rhythmic. The quiet sounds of water, wind, and birds provide a natural soundtrack, almost like an ambient meditation track. You smile quietly, aware that the environment itself encourages mindfulness. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker about how the canal seems to know when you're clumsy, teasing as a dragonfly hovers nearby. You laugh softly to yourself, stepping more lightly along the edge. The Chinampa feels alive, observant, forgiving, and persistent all at once. Another mainstream fact drifts in. Canals also served as microhabitats for fish and aquatic plants, creating additional food sources and natural pest control. This multifunctionality made Chinampas remarkably self-sustaining, a testament to ingenuity and ecological insight. You take a deep breath, feeling the layers of life and care around you. As you finish this stretch of canal, the rhythm of water, work, and observation continues uninterrupted. The Chinampa hums quietly, productive, alive, and enduring. You feel a subtle, satisfying connection, not to a single crop, plot, or person, but to the entire integrated system thriving here. You wander toward a section of Chinampa where maize stalks dominate, tall and upright, leaves rustling gently in the morning breeze. The plants sway slightly, creating a soft whisper that blends with the canal's gentle lap. You step carefully between rows, mindful of the shallow roots beneath your feet, and marvel at how the stalks seem both delicate and strong, bending yet unbroken. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you move along. Maize was a staple crop for the Aztecs, providing the majority of calories in daily diets. Its cultivation shaped agricultural cycles, labor allocation, and even ceremonial practices. You gently brush a leaf aside, feeling its smooth surface, imagining the countless hands that have tended similar stalks over generations. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers believe the direction in which a maize stalk leaned could indicate soil fertility or predict local rainfall. You glance at the nearest stalks, trying not to overthink whether they are subtly giving you advice. Historians still argue whether these observations were symbolic, practical, or both, likely a blend. You pause to examine the tassels at the top of the plants, noticing pollen grains shimmering faintly in the sunlight. Pollination happens mostly by wind, but workers sometimes encouraged it by gently shaking tassels or brushing pollen onto silks. Another mainstream fact: effective maize pollination was crucial for full, robust ears, and farmers actively monitored this stage to ensure high yields. You mimic the gentle brushing, careful not to damage the delicate structures. The canal hums softly nearby, water reflecting sunlight in dancing patterns across the soil. Fish dart briefly, disturbing small ripples. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some farmers used floating plants in canals to shade young maize and reduce algae growth, simultaneously protecting water quality and controlling temperature. It's a subtle intervention, barely noticed yet highly effective. Historians still argue how much human intervention influenced maize growth versus environmental conditions. Some suggest precise planting schedules and companion crops were essential, while others argue natural microclimates played a larger role. Standing among these rows, it feels like both factors merge seamlessly, creating a productive balance. You kneel to check the soil around a stalk, feeling for firmness and moisture. The roots are healthy, the soil dark and pliable. Another mainstream fact: maintaining soil contact with roots and ensuring adequate moisture prevented nutrient stress and supported strong growth. You feel a subtle sense of responsibility. Your presence, though temporary, interacts with centuries of cultivation knowledge. A small bird hops across the canal edge, eyeing your movement curiously. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker. Even the birds are quality control inspectors. You smile, noticing how wildlife and human labor coexist naturally here, each playing a quiet role in sustaining the system. As you move down the row, you spot young cobs forming. Their silky threads glow faintly in sunlight, delicate and promising. A quirky tidbit: farmers sometimes adjusted nearby plants or leaves to improve airflow around developing cobs, preventing disease and promoting even growth. You do this carefully, thinking about how small adjustments create significant results. The sun climbs higher, warming the air but moderated by water and gentle wind. Shadows shift slowly across the maize, tracing the outline of each leaf and stalk. You pause, noticing the calm coordination of plant growth, human labor, and environmental cues. It's a quiet orchestration, ongoing, self-reinforcing, and surprisingly relaxing. Historians still argue about exact yields of Chinampa maize and how much these systems could support in peak population years. Observing the lush, healthy stalks, it's easy to imagine why Tenochtitlan thrived. This combination of careful attention, environmental harmony, and subtle observation ensured food security in ways modern agriculture often struggles to replicate. You straighten, brushing soil from your hands, and look along the canal toward more distant plots. The rhythm of maize, water, and sun continues, steady and calm, a gentle testament to the enduring wisdom of Chinampa cultivation. You move toward a section where squash spreads low over the soil, leaves broad and shading the ground beneath them. The vines curl delicately around stakes and neighboring plants, sprawling in what seems like chaotic growth, yet there is an order to it. Kneeling, you brush your fingers along the leaves, noticing tiny droplets of dew clinging to their surfaces, sparkling faintly in the growing sunlight. A mainstream historical fact settles calmly. Squash, as part of the Three Sisters companion planting, plays a crucial role in preventing soil erosion and retaining moisture. Its sprawling leaves protect the soil while producing nutritious fruit, complementing the vertical growth of maize and the nitrogen-fixing beans nearby. You smile at how nature's choreography seems almost effortless, though it is clearly guided by generations of careful observation. A quirky tidbit drifts to your attention. Some farmers believe that the shape of a squash's leaves could indicate upcoming weather patterns, with drooping leaves signaling moisture or temperature changes. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were purely symbolic or based on actual observation. But watching the subtle dance of leaves in the breeze, it's hard to dismiss the possibility of a kernel of truth. You kneel to inspect a young squash, its pale green skin smooth and firm. A few small insects crawl along its surface harmlessly. Nearby, a worker hums, gently brushing pests onto a leaf away from the plant. Another mainstream fact: integrated pest management was common on Chinampas, combining observation, companion planting, and minimal intervention to maintain healthy crops. You try not to marvel too loudly at the ingenuity quietly woven into every row. The canal beside the plot glimmers in the morning light, reflecting the network of vines stretching across the Chinampa. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers used floating mats or small reeds in canals to signal property boundaries or plant types, doubling practical guidance with symbolic markers. You trace one with your fingers, amused at the subtlety of communication through floating debris. Historians still argue how systematic these micromanagement techniques were, with some suggesting they were widespread and others viewing them as local improvisations. From your vantage point, it feels like a blend of both, shared knowledge shaped by environment, observation, and necessity. You gently lift a small vine that has encroached onto a neighbor's plot, tucking it back into its own space. The task is meditative, hands moving slowly, eyes attentive, mind focusing on minor adjustments that produce major results. The calm repetition creates a soothing rhythm, accompanied by the gentle lap of water and distant bird calls. Another mainstream fact: squash leaves help suppress weeds and regulate temperature for nearby crops, reducing the need for labor-intensive maintenance. You notice the tiny shadow patterns they cast on the soil, a network of natural protection that requires little interference. It's efficient and elegant, the kind of system that feels like a quiet triumph over chaos. You glance down at a few developing fruits tucked under broad leaves. Their shapes are rounded, promising, almost shy as they emerge. A light joke drifts from a nearby farmer. Squash is like the introvert of the Chinampa, quietly doing its job without fuss. You laugh softly, appreciating the humor and the truth in it. As the sun continues to climb, the air grows warmer, but the shaded soil beneath the vines remains cool and moist. You kneel to adjust a leaf, ensuring that airflow reaches a developing fruit. This small, intentional act feels satisfying, a minor intervention with lasting impact. Historians still argue how much active management versus passive observation determines squash success. Some suggest careful pruning and attention to airflow was critical, while others propose the plants thrived largely due to the supportive design of companion planting. Watching the interplay, it seems both are true, design and observation working together in harmony. You straighten slowly, hands dusted with fine soil and moisture. The squash spreads quietly across its plot, productive, thriving, and balanced. You step back to admire the rhythm of growth, labor, and water, feeling a deep, quiet appreciation for this intricate living system. You wander toward a narrow chinampa where flowers, herbs, and vegetables are interspersed in what seems like a carefully casual pattern. The air is fragrant, carrying hints of mint, marigold, and damp earth. You kneel to examine a small bed of herbs, gently pressing a few leaves between your fingers. Their scent is faint but distinct, grounding you in the present moment. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Intercropping in chinampas wasn't limited to the staple crops. Aromatic and medicinal plants were integrated to support pest control, enhance flavor, and sometimes even provide spiritual benefits. You observe the layout, noting how taller plants cast shade on delicate herbs, while low-growing flowers mark plot boundaries and add visual cues for care. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Some herbs were believed to communicate with neighboring crops, encouraging faster growth or stronger roots. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were symbolic, practical, or a combination of both. Watching the intricate planting patterns, it's hard not to sense a quiet logic underlying these old traditions. You begin harvesting a small bundle of basil, careful to leave enough leaves for regrowth. Another worker hums a tune, fingers moving deftly as they trim nearby mint. A mainstream fact: many herbs harvested on chinampas serve dual purposes, both for culinary use and medicinal remedies, making them essential components of daily life. You inhale the mingling aromas, feeling a connection to centuries of practice. The water in the adjacent canal glimmers, reflecting sunlight and the green canopy of leaves above. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers believe that dipping a hand briefly into the canal before handling herbs purified both the gardener and the plants. A small ritual that blends hygiene, tradition, and superstition. You perform the gesture, smiling at the subtle elegance of these quiet customs. Historians still argue how much ritual shaped everyday agricultural practices versus mere habit. Some evidence suggests symbolic acts were deeply integrated into daily labor, while others argue they were occasional embellishments. Standing here, surrounded by meticulous planting, the distinction feels both subtle and inconsequential. Order and meaning coexist naturally. You move along a row of flowering plants, gently adjusting stems that have leaned too far into neighboring crops. Light filters through leaves, creating a soft mosaic of shadow and sunlight. Another mainstream fact: strategic planting of flowers helped attract pollinators, which indirectly improved yields of nearby vegetables and staples. You imagine tiny bees buzzing silently, performing their part of the networked choreography. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker. If the bees had a union, they'd be very particular about their working conditions. You chuckle softly, imagining the tiny insects filing complaints over pollen quotas. Even in historical gardens, humor finds its way. You pause to rinse your hands in the canal, water cool and refreshing. Tiny fish dart between your fingers, causing soft ripples. Another quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers believed fish could improve the health of the water by their activity levels. Lively fish meant a balanced ecosystem. Lazy fish hinted at potential problems. Observing them now, you note the vigor, feeling reassured. Historians still debate whether these observational practices were systematic environmental monitoring or folkloric interpretations. From what you see, it's likely both. Intuition informed by generations of careful observation. You tuck a small bundle of harvested herbs into a basket, satisfied with the quiet productivity. The sun climbs higher, warming the soil but moderated by nearby water and foliage. Shadows shift slowly across the plot, marking time without words or clocks. You straighten, hands still damp and fragrant, and glance along the canal toward the interconnected network of chinampas stretching into the distance. The rhythm of labor, growth, and observation continues, steady and unhurried. You approach a chinampa section where young maize and beans are intertwined with squash vines, a dense patch that demands careful navigation. The air carries the mixed scent of wet earth, growing leaves, and the faint sweetness of early blossoms. You step lightly, mindful of shallow roots, feeling the soft give of soil beneath your feet. It's a gentle, almost imperceptible rhythm, like walking on a living carpet. A mainstream historical fact settles in. The Three Sisters polyculture, maize, beans, and squash, was central to Aztec agriculture. Each plant played a specific role. Beans enriched the soil with nitrogen, maize provided structure, and squash retained moisture while suppressing weeds. You tuck a small bean seedling into the soil, imagining how this system has fed generations with minimal fuss and maximum efficiency. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some farmers believe that planting the three crops in specific geometrical patterns encouraged cooperative growth, almost as if the plants understood their roles. Historians still debate whether these patterns had measurable agricultural benefits or were primarily traditional conventions. Standing here, it feels like a little bit of both, intuition and empiricism intertwined. You kneel to examine a squash leaf brushing against maize stalks. Tiny droplets of water cling to its surface, refracting sunlight into soft prisms. Another mainstream fact: careful spacing and positioning of these crops enhanced airflow, reducing fungal disease and promoting healthy growth. You adjust a leaf slightly, enjoying the tactile rhythm of tending. Nearby, a canal hums quietly, reflecting sunlight in ripples that dance across the chinampa. A quirky tidbit: farmers sometimes encourage small fish to swim near young plants to keep pests in check. The fish dart energetically, a subtle sign of ecosystem balance. You smile at the simplicity of nature's cooperation. Historians still argue the extent to which aquatic life was deliberately managed versus naturally integrated. Observing the interaction of water, plants, and fish, it's clear that both happen simultaneously. Intentional care and natural balance reinforce each other. You move carefully along a row, checking for signs of stress or overcrowding. Some leaves are slightly curled, a natural reaction to sun or water, while others spread generously. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker. These squash are shy. They only reveal themselves when they feel safe. You laugh softly, noticing the almost playful personality attributed to plants. Another mainstream fact: harvesting intervals were carefully timed to ensure continuous food supply and prevent spoilage. Beans, maize, and squash were monitored constantly for readiness, and farmers adjusted tasks daily. You imagine the unseen coordination required to maintain steady production, an invisible rhythm connecting every hand in the network. You pause to rinse your hands in the canal, water cool against your skin. Small ripples spread outward, disturbing floating pollen and tiny leaves. A quirky tidbit: some farmers believe that tossing a small amount of canal water onto the base of young plants brought blessings or good luck, blending practical irrigation with subtle ritual. You indulge, sprinkling a little water with a smile. The sun rises higher, warming the soil and air. Shadows shorten, and the plants settle into their rhythm, bending gently with the breeze. You straighten, brushing soil from your hands, and take a slow breath. The chinampa feels alive in a way that is patient, observant, and enduring. Each plant, each ripple, and each movement contributes to a quiet, harmonious system that requires attention but rewards it with abundance and calm. You step into a quieter corner of the chinampa, where the early morning sun filters softly through the leaves of maize, casting gentle shadows across the soil. The air is warm but tempered by the water flowing through the narrow canals, carrying the scent of damp earth and subtle floral notes. You pause to take it in, feeling the gentle hum of life around you, the rhythm of water, plants, and hands at work. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness. Chinampas were designed to optimize light exposure and airflow, ensuring crops received sunlight without becoming scorched. This clever arrangement helped sustain dense, productive plots in limited space. You kneel beside a small maize stalk, feeling the firmness of the soil around its roots and noting how neatly the plants fit together like pieces of a living puzzle. A quirky tidbit drifts to your attention. Some farmers believe that whispering softly to plants encouraged growth, a practice that may seem mystical but also reflects careful observation. plants exposed to vibrations or gentle movement sometimes grew sturdier. Historians still debate whether these rituals had measurable effects or were symbolic acts to engage caretakers. You lean in and murmur a quiet, "Grow well," mostly to amuse yourself, feeling oddly calm. You notice a small network of flowers and herbs tucked between taller plants, their subtle colors and fragrances creating microhabitats for pollinators and beneficial insects. Another mainstream fact: companion planting in chinampas help deter pests, improve pollination, and maintain soil health, all without chemicals. You gently adjust the leaf that droops over a neighboring seedling, appreciating the balance between intentional care and natural processes. Nearby, the canal reflects sunlight off tiny ripples. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers placed small floating bundles of reeds or twigs in canals to indicate planting boundaries or track water flow. These markers blended functionality and symbolism, quietly guiding activity across the network of chinampas. You trace one with a fingertip, feeling the subtle utility of this tradition. Historians still argue how standardized such markers were. Were they consistent across regions, or improvised by individual families? Observing them now, it's clear the system could flex while maintaining coherence, an elegant combination of order and adaptability. You move along a row, inspecting the soil for moisture and adjusting a few leaves that shadow young seedlings too much. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker. These plants like their personal space. You laugh softly, recognizing the truth behind humor. The careful spacing is essential for growth and airflow. Another mainstream fact: maintaining soil structure and moisture balance was critical for yields. The gentle management of water, light, and nutrients ensured that crops remained healthy throughout the season. You touch the soil, feeling the combination of softness and resilience, a tangible reminder of centuries of agricultural knowledge. The sun continues its ascent, warming the canal and soil while casting shimmering reflections. A gentle breeze carries sounds and scents across the chinampa, blending with birdsong and distant laughter. You pause to let it settle over you, a calming symphony of natural and human activity working in quiet concert. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers believed the direction of growing plants or the tilt of leaves could indicate upcoming weather patterns, a form of ecological intuition. You glance at the maize stalks bending ever so slightly, imagining them communicating small signals about humidity and sun. Historians still debate how much these observations were systematically recorded versus passed down orally, but their practical effect seems evident. You straighten slowly, brushing soil from your hands and knees, and take a long, deep breath. The chinampa stretches out in all directions, a living network of water, soil, and growth. Everything moves in rhythm, cooperative and patient, rewarding observation, care, and gentle attention. You wander toward the edge of the chinampa network, where the plots begin to narrow and the canals curve gently, reflecting sunlight in slow, shimmering patterns. The air is warmer here, carrying a mingling of scents, earth, flowers, and the faint tang of canal water. You pause, taking in the subtle movement of leaves and the soft trickle of water, feeling the rhythm of life in these carefully crafted spaces. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your awareness. Chinampas were often surrounded by canals not only for irrigation but also for transportation. Lightweight canoes glided silently along these waterways, moving people, tools, and harvested crops efficiently without disturbing the soil. You imagine yourself gliding along the calm water, observing the orderly chaos of plants stretching into the distance. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers tied small floating bundles of herbs to canoes as markers or charms for safe passage and bountiful harvests. Historians still argue whether these practices were primarily symbolic or functional, but here they seem to add an almost whimsical touch to everyday labor. You smile quietly, imagining tiny bundles bobbing gently alongside your imagined canoe. You kneel to inspect a small bed of medicinal herbs tucked between maize and squash. Their leaves are vibrant, firm, and glistening with morning dew. Another mainstream fact: Medicinal plants were deliberately cultivated alongside food crops to ensure ready access for remedies, combining practicality with holistic care. You tuck a few tender shoots carefully into a basket, appreciating the quiet efficiency of integrated planting. Nearby, a small dragonfly hovers above the water, wings catching sunlight in rapid flashes. A quirky tidbit drifts into your attention. Some farmers consider dragonflies symbols of healthy ecosystems, indicators that water quality and soil fertility were balanced. You watch as it dips briefly, skimming the canal, then flits onward, a tiny living gauge of environmental harmony. Historians still debate how much symbolic interpretation guided daily tasks versus practical observation. Standing here, it seems both coexist naturally, ritual and utility intertwine seamlessly. You gently adjust the leaf drooping over a seedling, mindful of airflow and sunlight, yet aware of the symbolic dance playing out among the flora. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker. Even the insects have their own work schedules. You chuckle softly, noting the understated humor woven into the routine of labor. It reminds you that patience, observation, and gentle engagement are valued as much as skill or speed. You continue along a narrow path, brushing soil gently around young maize stalks and guiding sprawling squash vines. Another mainstream fact: the meticulous arrangement of plants maximized sunlight exposure, reduced disease risk, and enhanced yields. An elegant example of human ingenuity harmonizing with natural systems. You feel the satisfaction of being part of this living network, your small movements contributing to a centuries-old cycle. The sun climbs higher, warming your back, and the soft lap of water against the canal edges blends with distant bird calls. The Chinampa, viewed from this corner, stretches like a living mosaic. Water, soil, and greenery intertwined, functional yet beautiful, deliberate yet effortless. You pause to breathe deeply, feeling connected, calm, and quietly proud of your small, attentive contributions. A quirky tidbit drifts again. Some farmers believe the whisper of wind over the water could signal the best times for tending plants or harvesting. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the subtle symphony, and imagine yourself attuned to the rhythms of air, water, and leaf alike. Historians still argue about the empirical basis of such observations, but their meditative value is undeniable. You straighten, brushing dirt from your hands, and glance down the curved canal. Everything moves in quiet coordination: plants, water, insects, and human hands. You feel a profound sense of calm, a recognition that patience, observation, and gentle effort sustain life here, just as they have for generations. You step into the final stretch of Chinampa, where the plots narrow further and the canal bends gently, reflecting the soft late morning sunlight. The air is warm but tempered by the water, carrying a medley of scents: earth, growing plants, and faint floral notes. You pause to take it all in, feeling the gentle rhythm of life in these cultivated spaces, and a quiet satisfaction settles over you. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Chinampas were remarkably productive, supporting dense urban populations through careful integration of water management, crop rotation, and companion planting. Each element, soil, water, plant, and human labor, worked in harmony, creating a self-sustaining system. You kneel beside a small maize stalk, brushing soil gently around its base and marveling at centuries of agricultural knowledge embedded in this place. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some farmers believed that the order and orientation of plants could influence growth, a subtle blend of superstition, observation, and tradition. Historians still debate how much these practices affected yields versus serving as cultural or symbolic reinforcement. Watching the careful arrangement of crops, it's easy to see how intuition and experience merged seamlessly. You notice tiny insects flitting among the leaves, bees, flies, and other pollinators, each performing their invisible tasks. Another mainstream fact: pollination and pest control in Chinampas were supported by biodiversity, with insects, fish, and birds all contributing to ecological balance. You step lightly, mindful of the delicate web of life underfoot. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Small bundles of flowers were sometimes planted in strategic corners as both pollinator attractants and ceremonial offerings, blending practical benefit with spiritual acknowledgement. You tuck a bundle gently into the soil, smiling at the quiet dual purpose of these thoughtful gestures. Historians still argue how codified such ceremonial practices were versus being improvised according to circumstance. From your perspective, the distinction hardly matters. The combination of observation, ritual, and care is what sustains the Chinampa. You adjust a few leaves, guide a vine back into line, and feel the gentle cadence of work unfolding naturally around you. The sun climbs higher, casting warm light over the plots and canal, illuminating leaves, stems, and glistening water. A light joke drifts from a nearby worker. Even the canal knows when it's time to nap. You chuckle softly, taking comfort in the shared humor and the slow, meditative rhythm of labor. Another mainstream fact: careful management of water flow prevented soil erosion, balanced moisture, and supported year-round cultivation. You step back, observing the smooth gradient of the land, the flow of the canal, and the thriving plants, a living testament to the ingenuity and patience of generations. You pause, running your fingers lightly through the soil, noticing its texture, warmth, and life. The network of plants, water, insects, and human hands is vast yet interconnected, delicate yet resilient. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Farmers sometimes whispered to seedlings or tapped leaves to encourage growth, blending attentiveness with ritualized care. You murmur softly, smiling at the simplicity and intimacy of the gesture. As you stand, brushing dirt from your hands and knees, you survey the entire Chinampa. Rows of maize, beans, squash, herbs, and flowers stretch across the water, orderly yet organic, thriving under the rhythm of patient care. The canal hums softly, fish dart beneath the surface, and birds call intermittently, all synchronized in subtle harmony. Historians still debate the precise yields and efficiency of Chinampas, yet the evidence of their enduring success is undeniable. You feel a quiet connection to the legacy of those who cultivated this land, a gentle respect for their rhythm and observation. Every step, every touch, and every breath here seems guided by centuries of knowledge, repeated, refined, and passed down. You straighten fully, letting the calm and warmth of the morning settle over you. The Chinampa stretches endlessly, a living mosaic of soil, water, and growth. You feel a deep satisfaction, a sense of being part of something quietly enduring, a system where patience and attention cultivate life as much as soil and water do. The day continues, gentle and ordered, leaving you ready to step away yet carrying the rhythm with you.